All right, guys, we have another major prophecy fulfilled, proving once again Donald Trump is the Antichrist. The Antichrist would make a peace deal with the king of Jerusalem, which you see here. The king of Babylon makes a covenant with the king of Jerusalem. You can read about that in Ezekiel chapter 17. And then it says the king of Babylon despises the oath. Okay, and he breaks the covenant. So the covenant is between the two men. Okay, now Daniel chapter 11 says he will have indignation against the holy covenant. So Donald Trump has fulfilled this perfectly by cursing Benjamin Netanyahu, because Benjamin Netanyahu congratulated Joe Biden, and Donald Trump got angry and did an interview with Barak Ravid of Axios. And in his book on Abraham Accords, Barak Ravid interviewed Donald Trump, and he said, F him for announcing Joe Biden's victory. He said, I haven't spoken to him since. F him. Cursing and blaspheming, just like the prophecy said, he would have indignation against the covenant. Now, he would also have to have indignation against Israel as well, which he also did in the new revealed information in Barak Ravid's book and in these excerpts and audio clips on Axios, which we're going to look at. Okay, so this is fulfilling Daniel chapter 11, verse 28. He will have indignation against the holy covenant. Now, let's take a look at what came about in the articles on Axios to see the prophecy being fulfilled. Okay, in the series of articles, the first one we have is Introducing How It Happened, Season 3, Trump's Big Deal. So, Jonathan Swan is interviewing Barak Ravid, and he asks him these questions, and this is when they release this information. Trump blasts Netanyahu for disloyalty. F him. So with exclusive reporting, Swan and Axios, Barak Ravid go behind the scenes in the gripping, chaotic events that lead to the Abraham Accords and the deal between Israel and 4 Arab states that are changing the Middle East. Okay, so this article was released, as you can see here, December 11, 2021. And then on a series of other releases, December 13th, Trump big deal, may your house be destroyed. In this episode, Middle East correspondent Barak Ravid, national security correspondent Jonathan Swan explore the dramatic events of the deal of the century. Now, obviously, the deal was not between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Okay, so in this exclusive interview, Trump tells Barak the former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu bears much of the blame. He also reveals their supposed bromance over saying of Netanyahu, F him. So this is part 2, and what you can do is you can listen to the interview. We'll play some excerpts for you, okay, of what was stated so you can hear it from his own mouth. So that was December 13th. And then we have another post here, December 13th, the secret alliance to the Abraham Accords. It says something similar, okay? But now let's take a look at the details of what happened in these interviews with Trump. Okay, in this one, December 10th, Trump blasts Netanyahu for disloyalty. Okay, this is the big one. This is what was released. This is what stirred up the whole world. Netanyahu, who are the closest of political allies, doing their 4 years overlapping in office, at least to the public. Not anymore. I haven't spoken to him since. Trump said of the former prime minister, F him. What he's saying, Trump repeatedly criticized Netanyahu during 2 interviews for my book, Trump's Peace, the Abraham Accords, and the Reshaping of the Middle East. The final straw for Trump was when Netanyahu congratulated President-elect Biden for his election victory, while Trump was still disputing the result. The first person that congratulated Biden was Bibi, the man that I did so much for. Any other person I dealt with, Bibi could have stayed quiet. He has made a terrible mistake, quoting Donald Trump. Why it matters. Now, opposition leader Netanyahu is waging continuous campaign to win back the prime minister's office while on trial for corruption. One of his primary political calling cards was his close relationship with key U.S. politicians. One man in particular who remains highly popular in Israel is Trump. Okay, so Netanyahu's trying to keep his political face going, but now he's losing his calling card. My interview with Trump will feature a new season on Axios called How It Happened podcast, which we're showing you. Big picture. Domestic political reasons. Okay. Now, both Trump and Netanyahu cultivated a public perception that there was no daylight between them and then they worked closely together on key issues. By the end of the presidency, Trump had concluded that Netanyahu didn't really want peace with the Palestinians and was using him on Iran. Trump also felt that he'd helped ensure Netanyahu's political survival, but didn't get the same in return. He positively fumed about the video in which Netanyahu congratulated Biden. I liked Bibi. I still like Bibi. But I also like loyalty. The first person to congratulate Biden was Bibi. Not only did he congratulate him, he did it on tape. Trump told me, referring to Netanyahu. Reality check. Netanyahu was far from the first world leader to congratulate Biden. In fact, he waited more than 12 hours after the U.S. network called the elections, but Trump claimed he was shocked. When his wife Melania shared Netanyahu's video, he was very early, like the earliest and most. I haven't spoke to him since. F him. So then he goes on to talk about how Putin and Bolsonaro waited longer, but Bibi announced. So Trump was so upset about disloyalty, about everything he did for Netanyahu, everything he did for Israel. He's cursing and blaspheming Netanyahu. He's railing against Israel. Even the media in Israel is stating that he is anti-Semitic. Amazing. So he's going on and on here behind the scene. These remarks came during a 90-minute face-to-face interview in Mar-a-Lago, during which Trump repeatedly contended that he'd done so much more for Israel, for Netanyahu, than any other president. He cited decisions from withdrawing from the Iran deal, to moving the U.S. embassy, to keep troops in the region, recognize the Golan Heights in Israel. He noted he announced the Golan Heights move right before the election in April 2019. And when Netanyahu had been trailing in the polls, he would have lost the election if it wasn't for me. So Trump feels betrayed because he moved the Golan Heights in a political move to help Bibi, and it helped him stay in this sequence of elections. So Trump was very angry, and he said this is disloyalty, and he railed against Bibi. 18 months later, when Trump held an on-camera call with Netanyahu 10 days before the U.S. election to sign between Israel and Sudan, Trump asked Bibi whether Sleepy Joe could have cut such a deal. Mr. President, one thing I can tell you is we appreciate the help from the peace in America, Netanyahu cautiously, and Trump bristled. There were more substantial disagreements between Trump and Netanyahu over Iran, Netanyahu's plan to annex the West Bank, and Trump's desire for peace with the Palestinians. Even he criticized Netanyahu. Trump expressed some admiration for him as a politician, but also showed great interest in Netanyahu's legal troubles, though he said he'd never discussed them with Netanyahu himself. Okay. Now, just to keep this short, guys, basically Trump felt betrayed because Bibi congratulated Biden, okay, and he just basically just lost his mind, okay. So once that happened, he did this in this interview. Now, this was in April of 2021. Then he had a second interview with him in July, okay? So that's just this year. But he released this information during Hanukkah. He announced this to the world, December 10th. It's during Hanukkah. Very, very significant for us, okay? And so this is all the political things that they're stating, going back and forth. Now, I'm going to summarize a little bit of what if you watch the interviews, you'll hear this. But basically what happened is Bibi was annexing, and Trump didn't want him to annex the West Bank. So in order to stop Bibi from annexing, they announced the Abraham Accords. Now, of course, the Abraham Accords are also prophesied with the covenant with many. Okay, so it had to be. Now, for Bibi's part, he felt that within the language of the peace deal that Trump released, he could annex. okay? But Trump didn't want him to annex the West Bank, all right? So then Trump spoke to, or the team, Jared Kushner and them, they spoke to the UAE dignitary, and he wanted to make ties with Israel. So the team with Trump went to Bibi and said, look, you have a choice. It's either annex or make ties with the Arab nations. And he wanted both. But then the team said, no, you don't have a choice. You have to do what we know now is the Abraham Accords. You have to make ties with the Arab nations, okay? But Trump had to do that because of a dispute in this peace deal. This is the peace deal when they're meeting right here, okay? So this is the covenant, and now Trump is railing against the covenant, guys. This is amazing. This is exactly what the prophecy says. Every prophecy teacher will tell you the Antichrist will make a covenant with Israel, and then he would have indignation against the covenant. He would despise it. Now, in another article, Barak Ravid also revealed Trump felt used on the Soleimani strike. He says Israel did not do the right thing. So now the Antichrist would not only rail against Zedekiah, okay, the Zedekiah figure, he would also blast Israel. So again, December 15th, 2021, Trump felt betrayed by Israel. The assassination of Iranian commander Qasem Soleimani in January 2020 seemed like the height of the U.S.-Israel cooperation, but actually became a major point of tension between the allies. Behind the scenes, Trump expected Israel to play a more active role in the attack. And he griped that then Prime Minister Bibi was willing to fight Iran to the last American soldier. According to former senior Trump official, Trump himself told me Israel did not do the right thing. So now the Antichrist is also complaining about Israel. Trump made that remark in an interview last July for my book, Trump's Peace Deal, Abraham Accords, Reshaping the Middle East. Okay, it was in July, just like we told you. I can't talk about this story, but I was very disappointed in Israel having to do with that event. People will be hearing about that at the right time, Trump said. Between the lines, it's unclear if Trump's anger is entirely justified. A senior Israeli defense official told me that Israel proposed a more active role for the Israeli forces, but the U.S. insisted on being the ones to execute the strike. Israel also provided the U.S. with key intelligence report tracking Soleimani's cell phone. So Israel tracked the cell phone, U.S. did the strike. A former U.S. official said Trump's anger wasn't totally warranted. All right, but what he put the episode into that same box that he put in his feelings for NATO and the allies wanting the U.S. to do the fighting for them. Warranted or not, the episode stuck with Trump during his last year in office. Now, and you tried to pull Trump aside to make amends when he visited the White House in September 2020 for signing the Abraham Accords, but Trump wasn't convinced and continued to believe Netanyahu had used him. The former White House official told me. Flashback. January 3rd, 2020, Soleimani, the commander of Iran's regional network of proxies, international, arrived in Baghdad. Okay, so now they rehearsed the strike, okay? But again, Trump blasts Netanyahu for disloyalty. F him. Okay? Trump says Netanyahu never wanted peace with the Palestinians. Okay? Netanyahu's cold feet almost killed the Abraham Accords. And here you can see the title, Trump, the Antichrist, would also speak against Israel. Trump felt used on Soleimani strike. Israel did not do the right thing. Now, this is a post that, as you can see, we made in July 30th, 2021. And Johnny Storm, Don't Speak News, posted this on his blog. Title is Partial Timeline of Bible Prophecy Part 2, Summary of Daniel 8 and 11. So we did a breakdown in Daniel 11 on how Trump perfectly fulfills the Antichrist. Okay, so if you don't know this, let's go through all the prophecies that have been fulfilled. Let's start off with today, okay? And then we're going to go through all the other prophecy he's fulfilled in Daniel 11. Now, I'll provide a link to that blog post so you can see it, but this is the original of the blog post, and I just added this today. And his heart shall be against the holy covenant. he shall be grieved in return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. So this is in Daniel chapter 11. That's verse 28 and 30. So definitely get this. I'll put this in a blog post so you can get this, keep this information, do a study, and this is proof Trump is the Antichrist. Now, in the order of events, in verse 45, he shall plant his tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious mountain. So this is the U.S. Embassy being moved from Tel Aviv, okay, which was the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, on Tel Aviv and the glorious mountain, which is Jerusalem. So Trump announced the move of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in Hanukkah 2017. Okay? Prophecy fulfilled. And in his estate, he shall be a vile person. Okay? Because he's a vile person, that's why he's going to say things like he did, F him. He's a vile person, just like it says in verse 21. Okay? He'll stand up a vile person, which will not give honor to the kingdom. Okay? And Trump here is talking about he will come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries, okay? So this is the peace deal. Peaceably here is prosperity. Sawa in Hebrew. Thus the title of Trump's the Antichrist deal of the century is peace and prosperity. Trump obviously is a vile person who voted, who was voted in on the evangelical vote by flatteries, okay? But he's a vile person and he's going to curse and blaspheme. And after he had a league with them that he worked deceitfully, came up and he became strong with many people. He shall enter peaceably in prosperity, Sawa in Hebrew. Again, after the agreement or league was made with the Zionists on the contents of the peace deal. So really the Jews wrote the peace deal. That's why Netanyahu went to annex. Trump works deceitfully to gain approval of the evangelical leaders in support of Israel and the peace and prosperity deal. Thus, the small people being the Zionists and evangelical leaders on the Trump team. Okay? So that's in verse 23. Verse 24, he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. Meaning, he accomplishes the peace deal no other U.S. president made. Okay? So Trump accomplishes that peace deal. And his heart shall be against the holy covenant. All right? And this is what we're saying. Is the holy covenant, the covenant he did was to divide the land. He'd be against Christ, okay? And now what we're seeing is we're seeing him actually go against the covenant, all right? So it had to do with going against the scripture of truth, okay? In the deal of the century, it will be corrupt by flatteries, and he cast down the truth to the ground of practice and prospered. He'll destroy and corrupt wonderfully, all right? But now what we have, okay, the mighty and holy people. But now what we have is him actually being against the holy covenant and having indignation. All right, so that is fulfilled with Trump's blasting Benjamin Netanyahu and the state of Israel. They shall pollute the sanctuary fortress and take away the daily sacrifice, okay, and place the abomination that makes desolate. Okay, so we saw the abomination of desolation fulfilled. The daily sacrifice had been taken away. Okay, for time's sake, this is all here. This is all review things we talked about before. Now, this is the part that we're waiting to see. He will exalt himself, okay? But the only thing really left for him to do is to go into the third temple. And he will cause them that rule over many, and they shall divide the land again, okay? Well, dividing the land again is giving the Golan Heights and East Jerusalem, okay, provisions in the peace deal. And he shall confirm the covenant with many. That is the Abraham Accords. He shall stretch forth also in the countries of Egypt. All right, and the treasuries, okay, with Egypt and Libyans or Morocco and the Ethiopians and Sudan. So these are the nations that is part of the covenant with many and the Abraham Accords, the Muslim nations that made agreements with Israel, UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco. It is also combining the gods of three major religions called the Abrahamic faiths, okay? So as you can see, the Antichrist accomplished most of the prophecies revealing by after August 2019. He shall speak great words and blasphemy against the Most High and the saints of the Most High and change the times and laws. And they'll give him his hand for a time dividing a time. Okay, so he also, as a Nebuchadnezzar experience like Daniel 4, would have his dominion taken, but the judgment will set and take away his dominion and construe it, destroy it into an end. So this is when he lost the election. All right. So therefore, the only major prophecy left to be fulfilled relates to the third temple, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself as God. He fulfilled all the other prophecies. Now, I'll provide links to the article and blog post that we mentioned in July 30th. And again, you can see this is time is short. We're now at part 2 of the Biblical Timeline series. This time, Leland Jones went into a short summary of Daniel 8 and 11, which begins below. So we'll provide links to this, okay? I'll post this on my blog, and I'll also link it to Johnny's blog. But we are stating clearly, indignation against the covenant, the oath despised. Now, further details, we do have a playlist on the peace deal. Obviously, this is a playlist. Donald Trump is the Antichrist. Further proof and evidence of prophecy being fulfilled perfectly. The oath despised, guys, we've talked about it before. It's Ezekiel 17. Okay, to make it clear, this was the peace deal, and now the Antichrist is turning against Israel. Okay, turning against Israel, turning against the king of Jerusalem in Ezekiel 17, blaspheming, cursing as a vile person. This is the prophecy being fulfilled. Thanks for watching. Okay, now if you're not familiar with Trump as the Antichrist, we do have a proof in the playlist. Trump is the Antichrist. We'll have links to that showcase on Vimeo. Okay, you can also find that on YouTube. Thanks for watching, and God bless you.